Mr. Prime Minister, we're very happy to have you here, and I wonder if you would like to lead off by framing the conversation, if you will, in whatever way you choose.
Well, thank you, Steve.
We are on the record, incidentally.
Well, I'm in Washington this time for 3 reasons. The first reason is it's the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, which was begun with Bill Clinton, finished with George W. Bush, and has served both countries well for the last 10 years. Not just in its direct benefits to America and Singapore, but also in its indirect effects in the broader relationship between Singapore and America, which extends to security, anti-terrorism, education, cultural cooperation, in all sorts of fields. But also America's broader relationship with the region, because it was a signal that it is advantageous and sensible to deepen ties with the U.S., economic ties, and perhaps it makes sense for other countries also to think about this. And it has led to other deals which the U.S. has had with Asia, with ASEAN, with Korea. I wouldn't take credit for all the good things which have happened, but this was a signal early in the process. So that's the first reason. The second reason I'm here is because we are in the midst of, and hopefully towards the end of, negotiating the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's another seed which we planted in Singapore some quite long time ago with a few other small economies in the Asia-Pacific. Singapore got together with Brunei, with New Zealand, and with Chile. And we formed what we call the P4 Free Trade Agreement. Our trade was not very significant, but we saw this as a nucleus on which we could grow a tree. And we hope that in time other countries would come and join in and participate in this, and we would be able to develop towards an Asia-Pacific free trade scheme of some kind, which would be significant. And the TPP is the offshoot of this P4 which we planted. You probably know about it. America is part of it. So are your NAFTA partners. So is Japan, Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and a couple of others. And it is very consequential. Consequential because it accounts for 40% of the world GDP. Consequential also because it's a signal of America's commitment and seriousness as an Asia-Pacific power, which has always been and determined always to remain. And it's almost being completed. I think there are some small issues only to do with rice and vegetables, rice and beef, or something like that, with the Japanese. We've more or less settled our issues, and so have most of the other countries. And it awaits just the last step to being completed, and then the crucial steps to be ratified after being completed. And that depends on your electoral timetable and the pleasure of Congress. And we hope that there will be support to ratify that because it is important to the U.S., economically as well as strategically. And I say strategically because that's the third reason I'm here. The President has talked about rebalancing towards Asia and the importance of Asia to America. And we strongly support that. And we understand that for that to be meaningful and to have substance, it cannot just be just talk. It cannot even just be security, which is important, but it has to be a broad engagement of the region. And you have to have policies, measures, specific projects which you work with the partners in the region where it's win-win and people say, yes, America is a good and worthy friend and I'm on your side. And the TPP is one serious measure which shows the seriousness of your purpose. The region is changing. China is growing, developing, becoming more influential and will become more so by the day. There are many opportunities in the region. There are also tensions and complexities in the region between China and Japan, between Japan and Korea. Within Southeast Asia, each country has its own political dynamic. Between China and Southeast Asia, we want to be good friends, and we are good friends, We also have issues like the South China Sea disputes, which involve several of the ASEAN countries and, in a sense, ASEAN as a whole. So it's a region where things are moving and which America is part of and has to engage in actively. And you have many other issues on your agenda. Iraq preoccupies you, so does Iran, so does Syria, so does Eastern Europe and Ukraine. But we hope amidst all that busy platter, you remember at least once a day that in Asia you have many friends, many interests, and many investments. And it's in many countries, and we wish you well, and we hope to deepen that relationship.
Prime Minister, let me pick up on some themes in your remarks. There's a lot of worry about the relationship between the United States and China. And both countries have agreed to try to create this new type of major power relationship that can stabilize, contain, and hopefully reverse the growing strategic rivalry between the two. But at the same, and we have TPP and other positive developments that are trying to retain an open Asia. But you referred to these tensions in Asia. And if you compare the current situation to the situation in Asia 10 years ago, it's easy to see that 10 years ago, the overwhelming aspect of the trends was positive. The Declaration on the Conduct of Parties, the China-ASEAN strategic partnership, China and the Philippines were planning a state visit by the Chinese president to the Philippines. Trade between Japan and China was rising, and China soon became the top trading partner of Japan. And we were in the six-party talks with North Korea, and a year later, we were able to reach the September 19th joint statement in which North Korea committed itself to ending its nuclear programs and rejoining the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And now, as you mentioned, we have these severe tensions between China and Japan, between China and South Korea.
Oh, not between China and South Korea.
Excuse me, no, thank you for the correction, between Japan and South Korea. No, actually, South Korean relations with China are very good at the moment. I was just recently in South Korea and saw this firsthand. We have the disputes in the South China Sea. In other words, great power rivalry factors are becoming much more important in East Asia than, at least on the surface, appeared to be the case 10 years ago. Singapore is a small country that hits way above its weight in the international community, but which nevertheless has to be vulnerable to negative trends in the region. What is your sense as to what prospects are for reversing these negative trends and getting Asia back on an overwhelmingly positive movement?
I think if you compare where we are today with 10 years ago, it's not just the negative trends which have become stronger, but the positive trends also. It's both. What's happened is that the participants have become stronger, the interactions have become more intense, and when you're managing intense interactions, there's great benefits, but also great complexity. So the trade volumes between China and ASEAN, or China and Japan, is much huger now than it was 10 years ago. The people movements, I mean, tourism, students, business people moving, the volumes are much greater than before. Even trans-Pacific, between America and China, your trade, your investments, your degree of interconnectedness is much greater than before. But at the same time, because the countries have become stronger and the interactions are more, you have more friction points which emerge. The Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands are one which have been there between China and Japan, and that's heated up in the last couple of years. The South China Sea is an issue between China and several of the Southeast Asian countries, and that has also significantly heated up over the last couple of years. I would say that none of the Southeast Asian countries want to have a fight with China. In fact, China too goes considerably out of its way to develop friendly relations with ASEAN. And they have very thoughtful, comprehensive, committed plans to do that. But There is this issue of the territorial and the maritime disputes, and it is not easy to resolve because of another factor which has changed in 10 years, and that is that nationalism has become a stronger sentiment and a stronger factor in influencing governments. Certainly you see that in the present Japanese government's approach towards normalizing the country, and which is a deeply felt overriding objective of Mr. Abe. And certainly that's true in China too, not just amongst the intelligentsia, but even amongst the population. That China has hosted the Olympics, China has become successful, we are standing up again, we will take our place in the sun. And in these circumstances, when you come into contact over islands and waters, it becomes difficult to resolve. I think the correct answer from America's point of view, I don't think America uses the term a new model of great power relations. The Chinese say that. The Americans just say a new model of US-China relations, which is, I think, a more reassuring term to non-great powers. And the right approach to that is not to pull back, neither to be just lovey-dovey, but to engage constructively, but at the same time understand where your vital interests are and be quietly firm where vital interests are involved. And I think that's what the Chinese are doing, and I'm sure they expect the Americans to do no less.
When we look to the future, we not only worry about the role that China will play in East Asia, we worry about the quality of the US-China relationship, but we also worry about China itself. China has been growing very rapidly. Its growth has been good for the region, but it's also giving, on the one hand, China capabilities in the military sphere it didn't have before, and it's creating problems within China, disparities in the distribution of wealth, social changes that are inherently destabilizing. 2 years ago, you visited the Central Party School of the Chinese Communist Party and gave what I thought was an extraordinarily thoughtful speech in which you both looked at developments in China and at regional issues. And I was struck by one phrase in your speech where you said that China needed to upgrade its economy to continue improving people's lives. It has to restructure from an export-led economy to a more sustainable, demand-driven one. It must prepare for a rapidly aging population, strengthen social safety nets, and address rising income inequality. It must also undertake political reforms to meet rising public expectations for accountability while maintaining social order and stability. Now, what struck me when I reread your speech was that if you compare this to the bold program of reforms that were announced at the third plenum of the 18th Central Committee last November, it looks as though China actually, for its own reasons, is indeed trying to address a lot of these types of issues. And if they do so successfully, it could provide a base for successful continued rapid growth. But if they stumble in the process, it then raises the problem of instability in China as a long-term regional concern. I wonder if you could comment. Do you think that China is, in fact, trying to do the sorts of things that inspired your thinking on the subject?
Yes, I think they are trying to do that. They have seen rapid growth. They have seen the problems which this growth has generated, inequalities, pollution, social tensions. Of course, they've benefited from the resources which the growth has provided them in quality of life, in standard of living, in influence in terms of their defense capabilities. But they know that they have to address the problems which have arisen, and it is not just a matter of economic policy. It's also what they have now called social management, which means how do I maintain harmony within society, within the society. And it also has to address how the political system is going to work. They're not going to have primaries like you do for a very, very, very long time to come. But they know that they've got to find some way to engage the population which can follow what is happening and will increasingly want to have some kind of a say. Deng Xiaoping used to say, you cross the river one stone at a time. But if you look at these three problems, the economic part, I think crossing the river is less of a difficult challenge because there are models for economic development, for how you're going to transform your workforce, your industry, your productivity. World Bank has ideas. So many academics who have studied in so many countries. There are very few models for transforming a society like China. There are even fewer models for designing a political system which will work for a society which is changing in the way China's is changing. On that scale, with that history and culture, and that need for stability, but also openness and the opportunity for different voices to be expressed. They know this. They have taken the task very seriously. I think before their third plenum this year, they spent a long time consulting internally before they came up with this document, which was finally adopted. So they know what needs to be done. And Xi Jinping, I think, is personally engaged, chairing many of the leading small groups himself in order to bring the pieces together. He can't do it all himself, but his commitment will make a big difference to get moving a huge system which inherently has a lot of inertia. And so we have to wish them well. From an outsider's point of view, what the Chinese do domestically and succeed, that is good. But what is most important is that as China grows in its influence in the world, it is able to fit into the world and into the world order in a peaceful and a non-disruptive way, with its interests accommodated and yet welcomed by other parties as a constructive player with something to contribute. The way the US has been in the Asia-Pacific for 70 years since the war, or 60 plus years since the war. And if the Chinese can emulate you in that respect, I think it will be a great achievement.
Let's turn to Southeast Asia, a region that you are intimately familiar with. The collective growth rate of Southeast Asia continues to be among the highest in the world. But there are problem areas in Southeast Asia. We have the fact that only 4 of the 10 members have territorial disputes with China. We have political instability in Thailand, severe political instability. We have upcoming presidential elections in Indonesia. And Indonesia is the big heavyweight in Southeast Asia. Are the trends in Southeast Asia moving in the right directions? How confident should outside observers be that ASEAN will be able to retain the degree of solidarity that it has surprised the world by displaying over the last several decades?
We are not a single United States of ASEAN. We are not even the European Union. We are 10 independent countries making common cause on issues which affect sometimes all of us, sometimes many of us. And we know that if we want to be relevant in a regional architecture, then speaking together makes a lot more sense than speaking separately. I think that there will always be differences in strategic perspectives and postures of the different countries. It must be different if you're Laos, landlocked and adjacent to China, as opposed to Indonesia, an archipelagic state with 230 million people and a significant regional power. Your perspective will be different, your stance will be different. And so ASEAN will not have one foreign policy or one defense policy, but we hope that we will have enough consensus that when something happens in our region, which, because it is in our neighborhood, affects the tone for the whole neighborhood, we can take a stand and have a coherent and a substantive view, as we are trying to do over the South China Sea. Not all ASEAN countries are involved with disputes. We don't all have to have a dispute in order to make common cause. We don't take positions on the individual territorial claims, because in fact some of them are between ASEAN countries, and you can't say who's right and who's wrong. But that you must deal with this in accordance with international law, including the Convention on the Law of the Sea, that you must deal with it peacefully and with moderation, and that we need a code of conduct so that you don't have accidents at sea and escalation and unnecessary conflict and unintended conflict. I think these are things which ASEAN has a view on and which ASEAN has expressed a view on. And I think that's constructive.
You picked me up on my misstatement to correctly note that South Korea and China have very good relations at the moment, at a time when the two very important U.S. allies in Northeast Asia, Japan and South Korea, are not getting along well together for a variety of reasons. But we also have the Sino-Russian relationship, which, because partly of events in Europe, seems to have been propelled to an even higher level of cooperation through the conclusion of this long-term gas supply agreement that was hammered out a month ago.
Yeah, in Shanghai.
That's right. Should the United States be concerned when South Korean relations with China significantly improved from the low point of 3 years ago at the time of the Chonan ship incident? Should we be concerned about good relations between Russia and China? Will this impact on East Asia in a way that is likely to be detrimental to security interests in the region?
Well, first, I think you should be concerned that your treaty partners have good friends in the region. Because if your treaty partners are at odds with others in the region, you're their partner and there are implications for you. South Korea is a treaty partner. Japan is a very important treaty partner. And I think that one of the reasons why South Korea is getting along well with China is because it's having some difficulties with Japan. And one of the reasons Japan's difficulties are with not just China, but also South Korea, is because of the reopening of the issues which go back to the Second World War and before, and which have never been properly put to rest the way they were put to rest in Europe after the Second World War. So it's really a sovereign choice for the Japanese to make, but as a partner of the Japanese, which wishes it well, I'm sure that you will express the hope, as I think Vice President Biden has, that Japan will act cautiously and circumspectly and will try to develop its relations with its near neighborhood, China and Korea. They can't do it themselves. It takes two hands to clap, so you need the Chinese as well and the Koreans to be part of it. But unless you can put the Second World War behind you and not keep on reopening issues of comfort women, of aggression, of whether or not bad things were done during the war, I think that this is going to be a continuing sore. Between China and Russia, this is an old play. When the Soviet Union had difficulties with America, America made friends with China. Now that America has difficulties with Russia, the Chinese, they will make friends with Russia. And Chinese have some issues with you, but they will make friends with Russia. So this is par for the course. But the Russians are 200 million or less, shrinking, and they cannot substitute for what America brings in terms of markets, technology, investments. For that matter, they don't supply as many US Treasury bills. And I think the Chinese know that. So I don't believe the Chinese will want to rupture their relations with you at all. They will want good relations with you, but they will approach it in a muscular way. And I imagine so will the United States.